Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Hi, how are you? I'm Jim Preschlack. I'm the 3rd Ward Alderman, one of 2 in Lake Forest. And we're here for the Lake Forest Community Forum on solar energy. And thanks for braving the weather. I think it's always ironic to talk about solar energy when you're in a hail, sleet, snowstorm. And I often say that Lake Forest is a beautiful place, but it's really, really special because of the people. And it's special because the people really care about the community and our environment and our state and our quality of life. And I think this topic tonight really hits on something that obviously you all care about because you're here. And so thank you so much for coming. Really, really appreciate that. I also appreciate the panelists. We have a great agenda. So thank you, Becky. Becky is going to talk about the Future Energy Jobs Act. And how many people here know about that? Okay. I learned just recently about it, that it was passed in December of 2016. And it's been in effect since June of 2017. And so she's going to cover that and then talk a little bit about rooftop solar. And then Tomas is going to talk about community solar, which if you can't do the rooftop configurations, there's a program here that's able to plug into the different garden solar communities and assets that could be built so you could still participate in it. And the Job Act obviously is overarching all of this. And then we're going to get into our Solar Smart program here within Lake Forest. And Jay Futterman is going to help us from a Highland Park solar ambassador perspective to share some learnings that we pulled in to that as well. So thank you again, and we're going to try to hold the questions till the end. I know there's a lot to cover, and so each one of the speakers is going to communicate maybe some topics of interest for you to focus on, maybe ask a couple questions, but try to keep the topics or the questions towards the end. And with further ado, Becky, please. Thank you.
And I also want to thank you for spending your evening here tonight. And I love that people knew about the Future Energy Jobs Act, FEJA. Did anyone actually work on getting that passed? Did anyone actually contact their legislator? Or, oh man. Well, FEJA was the beginning of a transformation of Illinois' energy economy to a renewable energy economy. And it was the first step, and we will need to take more steps. So if you do want to be part of that, you can email me, and my email address is at the end of the presentation, but it's also easy to remember. It's just becky@votesolar.org. And I will make sure that you get updates about what's happening in Springfield on legislation. But tonight I just wanted to spend some time talking about what already passed in 2016. Yes, it has been the law of Illinois for 2 years, but really the programs are just starting now. So it takes the wheels a little time to grind out rules and protocols and draft, sample contracts and all the things that have to get done before the market can actually launch. And in this case, it took 2 years. And so now we're at the very beginning of launching a big new solar market in Illinois. So this is a very timely conversation. How many people are here because you're thinking about getting solar panels on your own home or thinking about community solar as an option for you? Okay, great. Awesome. So hopefully I will say something that is useful to you, and if you have questions at the end, I'd love to be able to connect you with the right resources. Okay, so Vote Solar is a nonprofit solar advocacy organization. We work in 26 or 27 states around the country. My job is the Midwest states, so I work a lot now in Michigan and Minnesota, trying to get them to do some of the stuff Illinois did a couple of years ago, and we're also working in Wisconsin and Ohio. And our, motivation is to make solar more available to more people. And we think that it's a solution to multiple problems. Obviously, it's a solution to climate change mitigation. It's also a solution to high electricity bills. So it's a way to insulate your electricity bills from fuel cost fluctuations. It's also a way to have local economic development. It creates jobs. And it's also, part of climate change is actually creating a resilient electricity system. So when there are heat waves or polar vortices, we have multiple ways of generating electricity and heating our homes. And actually this past week in Michigan, while there was a natural gas disaster at a gas compression system station, there was a fire. So gas supply was low, very dicey. The solar systems were running. So that's why we work on what we do. I just have this in every presentation because it is the big context for all the work we do. The United States and all of our states have put 40 years and lots of money into developing this technology and making it cost effective and affordable. And now it is cost effective and affordable and it works. So we are, we're at that moment where it outcompetes all the dirtier sources of electricity, and we just need to motivate our utilities and our policymakers to actually get it on the grid. The goal of the Future Energy Jobs Act was to bring renewable energy to Illinois. The act actually calls out what benefits that they were trying to achieve. So bill savings, a modern flexible grid that's distributed and not all central station, economic development and jobs, reducing environmental impact, and making sure that all customers get to take part in these benefits. So there are really strong provisions in Illinois' law to make sure that it's not just affluent customers, but also low-income customers and the communities that actually have been hosting the dirty power plants that start to get some of the benefits. Lots of numbers, so apologize for the numbers, but this is what the act requires. 4,300 megawatts of new solar and wind development in Illinois. So that was a big change because the previous renewable statute that was on the books in Illinois allowed compliance through the purchase of RECs from renewable energy credits, RECs, from projects that were in Texas or outside of the Midwest. And in FEJA, the projects have to be here in our state, which makes a lot of sense. Wind is a little bit ahead of solar, so FEJA put more emphasis on developing solar. So 3,000 megawatts ultimately. The 2020 target is 2 million wind and 2 million solar megawatt hours. So that's how much electricity can be generated by a megawatt of the resource over an hour. And then it goes up from there, 2025 and 2030. You will not be quizzed on any of these numbers. I wanted to just give you a sense of the magnitude. So a megawatt of solar power heats up or can run about 150, 160 homes. So we're talking about 3,000 of those. That's a lot of solar on the grid starting from zero. There are also energy efficiency provisions in FEJA. Skip over that. Drilling down on the solar targets, this is another really good feature of the FEJA bill. It recognized that if you don't create set-asides for certain types of solar, what you'll get is just huge scale, utility scale projects, hundreds of megawatts out in the farmlands, which those are good projects, but we also want to make sure that there's room for distributed solar, rooftop solar, community scale solar. So the bill actually created tiers. So 25% of the total amount of solar power has to come from projects that are lower than 10 kilowatts. So that's like a residential rooftop size. 25% between 10 kilowatts and 2 megawatts. So when Tomas talks, he's going to talk about those 2 megawatt projects that are community solar. And then 25% from for specifically community solar, and then 25% TBD, so it can be anything. And the Illinois Solar for All program creates additional incentives on top of the regular incentives for projects that are serving low-income Illinoisans. And $30 million for job training programs to make sure that we're training Illinoisans, the people who need the jobs most, to work in the solar workforce. So we're pretty proud of all of those provisions. Just so you get a sense of what it looks like, this is a 1.5 megawatt DG project. So it's a rooftop solar project. It's a, commercial scale. So probably the equivalent amount of power that it would take to run 200 homes, something like that. Illinois Power Agency is the agency in Illinois that has overseen all of the implementation steps. So they started by creating a long-term renewable resources plan. They hired program administrators. They created a list of all the approved vendors in the state. So if you're on the approved vendor list, you can get these incentives and pass them along to customers. And they created an adjustable block program. So this is the incentive that you get for building a project, and it declines over time. So the theory is, over time, the cost of solar is coming down, electric bills continue to rise, the need for the incentive goes away, and that's how the program is designed to run. Okay, so this is, I was asked to focus a little bit more on residential rooftop solar because Tomas is going to talk about community. So when you decide to do rooftop solar in your home, you'll sit down with a developer and they will walk you through, based on your electricity use and the orientation of your house or your property, what the costs and the benefits are. And more Illinois homeowners will find that the benefits outweigh the costs substantially. You get the energy savings from not purchasing as much grid power. You get the renewable energy credits on top of that. And for the next few years, there's also a federal tax credit. And let's see, skip over that for now. I wanted to just walk through. This is the basic math, and this is an example, so don't hold any developer to these actual numbers, because I'll start getting phone calls from developers saying, what are you talking about? But we took an average home, and we ran it through a DOE model to kind of come up with the basic kind of math you might see. So if you buy an 8 kilowatt system for a house, and you're a household that used 14,000 kilowatt hours per year, your installed cost is going to be somewhere around $20,000. The state incentive, the REC value, is going to offset about $12,000 of that, right? So remember what I said before, that declines over time. So if you're thinking about doing this, you want to get in early, because that's when the incentive is highest. The federal tax credit is about $6,000. The year one, this is the cash flow analysis. So you see on the left, that blue bar that goes all the way down, that's the cost. All the rest are the benefits. So first year is all those tax benefits, and then all those smaller blue bars are the bill savings you get every year. And you end up with a simple payback period of about 5.5 years, with a net present value for the whole thing of a net positive $4,000. So it's a good deal, and it's an especially good deal right now. Again, the federal tax incentive also is scheduled to disappear over the next few years. I think 2021 is the last year. Tomas, you might know more precisely, but so now's a great time to go solar, is the bottom line there. The second chart it just shows your electricity bill for this typical household that we set up. with solar and without, and you can see it's substantially better with. Okay, so I think I'm going to just leave it there. There was a lot of other stuff that we could go over in the presentation, but I feel like I would rather turn it over to Tomas and get to the dialogue part of the session so I can actually answer questions that you have as opposed to guessing what they are. So I think that's what we'll do. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to ask for a little bit of patience while I take a few seconds to figure out how to work this. All right, there we go. So I'll start with saying thank you and a little bit of background on myself. So I'm going to assume everyone here pays their energy bills on time to ComEd. Maybe there's someone from the Peoria area here, so to Ameren as well, thank you. We all in this room created the Future Energy Jobs Act and the funding that makes all of this possible as ratepayers. We, if you look at your bill since June 1st, 2017, you'll see 2 additional points. One is to help bail out 2 Exelon nukes, and one is to rebuild a renewable portfolio standard. That $2 a month that we pay is what creates the ability to have these rents and really reset this this 25% target that's so important across Illinois. Myself, I graduated in 2011, so if you do remember, that's when the price of solar just really went down to 157. And my background was in sustainability and urban policy, and I got to go to China and study what they were doing. And after graduation, I kept on trying to find where is that in the United States, especially in Illinois. And in 2015, after working in Philly in tech and marketing for a couple years, I said, you know what, I really want to be in this space. I'm going to create a space for myself in this, and I hope it turns into something. And I did a great podcast, and flash forward a few years, that led to me connecting with Trajectory right when they were getting started, right as the Future Energy Jobs Act was getting ready to pass. I say all that because this is really something that impacts everybody across Illinois. Sometimes it's liberal arts majors trying to find a space in this industry. Sometimes it's a farmer who is thinking about what is their land going to look like for the next generation, and how are prices going to change for soybeans and corn, and what are they leaving their children and their grandchildren. This is a farmer where we're talking about doing a potential solar project there, and part of his farm would be left for farming, and part of it would be 20 acres where he would have lease payments and be able to count on that for future generations. So for how community solar works, you see by that tree that is very much to scale. You find 15 to 20 acres in a field, typically a rural area, but sometimes even in an urban area. For example, if you have a quarry that you can't place anything else on, you could propose that for community solar. That's something we're actually working on. You put 7,000 solar panels down. The power from that is going to go to your utility. And then the utility is able to connect with homes, businesses, nonprofits, etc., who want to see savings on their energy bill, who wouldn't be able to go solar. And then they see the benefit on their bill as if they had solar panels on their property. This is what one of these can look like. They're pretty fantastic looking, especially with it's subjective of course, but with pollinators, and this is an example of a pollinator-friendly one, you can cross over with environmental efforts to rebuild monarch butterfly populations, local pollinators such as bees, but we're connecting with folks across the state who can put local prairie and local pollinator flowers in partnership with these. As to what makes a community solar site viable, it's about 15 to 20 acres, which, and I'm in ComEd territory, so I can actually use this reference. I can't use this once I go past a certain point. 15 to 20 acres is about the size of a Navy pier. So you fill that with about 7,000 solar panels, that's 2 megawatts. We make sure that it's close. Typically, we want to be within about a mile of a substation, and we want to have access to 3-phase lines nearby. And we want to find land that has no better use for the next 15, 20, 25, 35 years. We're not trying to take the good farmland out of production. Illinois farmers, as you all can guess, are very protective of that land. And we want to keep that active. But if you have a dry ditch or you have a spot where you wouldn't really be able to farm, this is fantastic. As to where they actually go, these are examples of two of our proposed projects in the greater Peoria area. Again, it's looking at a farmer's parcel and finding the part where they're not going to be farming. And often in these meetings where we determine where these are going to be, sometimes it's 2 or 3 generations. And we'll be at a subway with one of our farmers. And when we were finalizing the lease, he had a son who was about 41, 42, and the 3rd generation who was on his iPhone game, and he was like 8 or 9. And as we're like finalizing the details, they're again asking like, okay, this is also going to be your land eventually. Like, is this good with you too? So there's a real nice comprehensive aspect to this. As for what it means for the communities, and this is an example of how it looks on the engineering side. And so we actually work with a firm to identify where every single one of those 7,000 panels can go, how it's going to connect to the 3-phase line, and any additional technical details to figure out. Again, here's another example of what they can look like with local pollinators. And we use single axis trackers, which mean, as everyone knows, the sun is going to move throughout the day. And so we use solar panel trackers that can actually follow the arc of the sun, so we're maximizing the amount of power that we're able to generate. As for the timeline, it starts with those meetings, which again, sometimes they're around dinner tables, sometimes they're at the subway, sometimes they're in meetings like this. Folks come up to us and say, oh, I have some land, or my family has some land. I'd love to learn more about this. We go through looking at the land, go through a lease. We connect with the utility as a developer to make sure that this amount of power can actually go onto the grid and we can handle it. And then we do a lot of local community meetings. We do town halls and open houses. Our town halls are going into an area and saying, all right, FEJA's just passed. We're looking at potentially doing community solar. Here's an overview of what it is, and people ask questions. And those have been really fantastic because you get just such a mix of people. Sometimes, and I'm from Oak Park, Illinois, so sometimes it's the people like Lake Forest and Oak Parkers. Very much like, yep, climate change, energy bill savings, all on board of this. Sometimes it's folks who are cleaning out coal plants, and they're the strongest advocates coming to our open houses and town halls to say, this is the future, we want this, I want these kind of jobs for my children, we want these type of energy bill savings. Then we connect with local zoning entities, and we are in the process of applying for the RECs. And then following that, developers like ourselves will start reaching out to folks in Lake Forest and across the state about potentially subscribing to a project. And then developers also finance and construct and then manage the projects themselves. Again, when we think about issues like global warming and climate change and all these things that can kind of be pretty large, I really appreciate that this is something across Illinois we're all having to play in. I mean, this is literally what one of these zoning meetings looks like, and that's John and Dan from our team. Dan has the very serious position, and John is passing out a deck. But that's a county board zoning meeting where people are considering in Marshall County, and they ended up approving that project, like, we're going to put this on our land for 35 years. So that's just something, again, we can often think about these things specific to one part of Illinois, but I really appreciate that dynamic. As to how the community can benefit from these, we are working with Illinois-based labor to build our projects, and other developers have similar commitments. And then the local electricity savings. So Trajectory, and again, other developers, will be providing subscriptions. Folks will be able to see about a 10% savings on their energy bill, on the energy portion of their electricity bill, by subscribing to a community solar project. And then the way these are valued in the municipality or in the city or wherever you're going to place these, that entity will see an additional $15,000 approximately in tax revenue, which then can go to schools, it can go to nonprofits, it can go to roads. And then ourselves and other developers work in building curriculum with local schools and local high schools as well. that's just a little bit of background of folks that our company has worked with and projects. That's the Denver airport, which one of our partners did. The reason why we chose that slide is often when we're looking at these projects and talking to people, inevitably there's two questions that arise. One is, it's pretty gray and dark out in Illinois a lot, and I'm really glad I've really gotten to know farmers, because farmers across Illinois will tell you we have the best sun and soil to grow everything. And then also, could you put these, near a road, or near a highway, or near an airport, etc.? Or are they just going to blind everything? And this is a perfect example of how they can be integrated into the landscape, especially in a high traffic area. So that's just a quick overview of community solar, and happy to go into more detail in the Q&A, but thank you for your time.
Good evening. Again, my name is Chuck Myers. I'm with the city. Jim is here. He's with the city also. We're going to just give you a brief overview of what the city is doing right now with solar. And then after that, we're going to go into questions. We definitely want to give you time to ask questions. So I wanted to back up a little bit and just mention how this all came about. I guess I should advance this. Some of you may have heard of the Lake Forest Collaborative for Environmental Leadership. That's the LFCEL up there on the screen. That is a group that was started about 7 years ago by the city. It's a collaborative that has a number of key agencies that were put together. It's the city and Lake Forest Open Lands, the school district 67 and 115, and the Lake Forest College. So representatives from each of those agencies get together about once a month on a regular basis, and the primary focus is education and leadership, obviously, as the name would imply. So we've worked on a number of projects over the years, some related to stormwater, some related to native planting, a lot of different areas. But in 2015, we decided to focus our efforts on a sustainability plan. You can see it looks something like that. If you'd like a copy of it, you can go onto our website, the city website, and take a look at it. But that sustainability plan was adopted by the city and the collaborative back in 2016. And one of the things identified in that is energy efficiency and renewable energy. So that became one of the primary goals. So that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight. But also, over the last year, we became more aware of some programs out there. And one of them is SolSmart. So SolSmart is led by the International City and County Management Association and the Solar Foundation. So Jim is going to give you more details on what they do, but just to let you know, we're one of 22 Chicago area communities that are part of this. It is a federally funded program, and it's set up as a kind of a grant program. So we apply, we put in an application, they review it, and you may not have heard of this group, but down in Chicago there's a group called the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. They're the ones that have hosted this. So they asked us to be a part of it. The funding went through. It's only the second year of this, and we don't know how long that's going to go. This could be the last year. We'll see. But we're just getting started. We had all the work that began with the application. We found out, I think it was in October, and since then we've been involved with a few things. That's where I'll let Jim jump in and talk a little bit about that.
All right, thank you, Chuck. As Chuck explained and provided some background information on the SolSmart program, there's obviously goals associated with that program. One of the main goals is to make it faster and easier for people in general, our residents here in Lake Forest, to choose solar energy. SolSmart, the kind of side goal is to recognize at least 300 local governments with one of their designations. Now that designation is either gold, silver, or bronze, depending on what you submit and what you do throughout this program. If you look to the right, that image there outlines that's actually last year's Soul Smart program, communities that went through that in the Chicagoland area. If you see along the lakefront there, our closest neighbors would be Highland Park and Glencoe. They both obtained a bronze designation last year. One of the other main goals of the Soul Smart program is that they highlight it as, once you get this designation, you're open for business. Now, what does that mean to us here in Lake Forest? Really, it's awareness. If you wanted to apply for a solar permit 8 months ago, today, tomorrow, 3 weeks from now, our community development department would absolutely work with you in getting that permit. Really, this program's an opportunity, though, to raise awareness and continue to promote solar. Lastly there, my last bullet point, Soul Smart, what they're doing for us is they're actually providing us with technical assistance. They have some experts that help us through the process. We meet bi-weekly with the other communities a part of the program, along with these experts, as we're working through the process and finding ways and opportunities to improve our processes here in Lake Forest to ultimately make it easier for residents here to apply. Just some, as Chuck stated earlier, we are still in the very early stages of the Soul Smart program, but we have reached some milestones that I think are certainly worth noting. One being our community development staff. Our director is actually here tonight, Kathy Zerniak. They've done a great job of and working on drafting this residential solar permit checklist. So once that's drafted and complete, it's really going to be a nice handy guide to, if you're interested in applying, if you follow that guideline, start checking off the things that are the submittals needed for that permit, it will really help to expedite that process once our community development department has to review it. Our community development staff is also a part of the Soul Smart program. About 3 weeks ago, attended a solar permitting training. It's also worth noting, though, that although this one training was part of the Soul Smart program, Kathy's done a great job with staff in general. Over the past 3 years, they've attended numerous different trainings. Lastly, we are working on, and currently we kind of have a placeholder right now. It's very preliminary, but we will have a solar landing spot where you can find updates on the Soul Smart program. Once that checklist is finalized, the plan is to have it on there. And other solar related information as we continue to get that info from our Soul Smart colleagues. So we look forward to continuing to update that. And before we move on to questions and answers, we do have one other person we do want to introduce. Chuck's got a quick introduction for him.
All right, and Alderman Fresh earlier mentioned, Jay, you're back here. I just wanted to kind of read his story really quickly. It's just a paragraph, just to let you know if you have any questions. He is here to participate in the question portion, but I'll just read his story. It says, Jay first got interested in solar out of environmental concerns. He used to live in Portland, Oregon, but saw how solar was becoming more and more common and realized that this technology has advanced to the point where, as a homeowner, it can make sense. When he moved to Highland Park, he saw trains full of coal on the way to the power plant and thought he may need to be part of the solution. Rather than just being upset by the problem, Jay had panels installed on his roof in April of 2016. Since then, he's been trying to share his story with others in Illinois. He believes that we live in an area that solar works well and can save money while providing clean, renewable energy and job growth. So a little bit about Jay, and so we're going to open it up to questions, but I just want to remind you, of course, our panelists here are ready to answer all kinds of questions. So, and then Jay's here. If he provides that, he's been there, done this as a homeowner, so I think he can provide some valuable insight. Of course, Jim and I are here. If there's any city kind of questions, but more importantly, Kathy Cerniak, as the Community Development Director, she is available for questions as well. So we'll open it up with that.
Real quick note before we move on, that is a picture up there of Jay's home and project.
Yes, I'm gonna ask the first question. Jay, would you mind going through your discovery process and your experience around how the installation, the power savings, and the business case played out? I think one of the things in Becky's slide that struck me was I was curious about maintenance costs after the initial install, damage, repair. Like, what would be the realistic life cycle costs that a resident would face, and how did you experience it? And just walk us through your development. I think that'd be really helpful.
Great. So I used to live in Oregon, moved back to this area in 2013, and when I first bought my house, I looked at solar at that time, and it was still pretty expensive. But as Becky showed, the cost of solar year by year has come down tremendously, and federal and now state incentives have come along since then, which really made it make sense financially. It's not just something you would do because you want to, fight fossil fuels and help the earth, but it makes economic sense. If you don't care about polar bears and global warming, but you like money, it still makes sense to do solar. So for me, the process kind of started by doing a little research and understanding the financial incentives and how the billing worked. You need to first get an understanding of how much energy you use in your house and really minimize that, because your installation is going to be a lot less if you use less energy. So that means looking at things like your light bulbs, your insulation, turning things off, get that power bill as low as you can, and ComEd offers free assistance with that. They'll send someone to your house and take a look and give you some advice. And then there's a 30% federal tax credit that basically if you pay taxes, 30% of your installed cost of the solar will come back to you as a credit. And then Illinois has the renewable energy credits, which with FEJA are a little different than they were when I first got my installation. But that's going to cover probably a third or more of the installed costs. And then beyond that, you figure in what's called net metering. So in June, my system makes a whole lot more energy than I need. And my electric meter, in essence, runs backwards. So ComEd is measuring how much excess energy I'm making, and that's all getting put onto the grid, and it sort of runs an account. So month to month, I'd say, oh, there's 80 kilowatt hours of excess generation this month, 100 this month. So then when November, December comes and it's dark and cloudy and I'm using more energy, I can draw down from that reserved amount I've banked. So you kind of have to have a good understanding of that. And then you need to think about your roof, right? Ideally, you put solar on the southern facing roof. That gets the best light, but my installation, which used to be up there, is on the east facing roof, which it doesn't make quite as much electricity that way, but it still pencils out really well. I since have some now on my west-facing roof, but you need to make sure your roof is going to be in good shape for a number of years. You don't want to put a system up on a roof that needs replacement within 10 years probably. You want to make sure that there's no major obstructions like trees or anything like that. And then for me, it was just a matter of having some installers come. I'm a solar ambassador with Illinois Solar Energy Association now. They're a nonprofit group that does solar advocacy and education specifically in Illinois, and we've got a great website, illinoissolar.org. And there's a number of qualified installers that are there, and I wound up just calling 3 of them up, and they came and took a look at the roof, at the exposure. They're all gonna have their own kind of favorite solar panels that they may try and promote or give you some different options. And I just kind of went with a company that I had a good feeling from that gave me a good price. The solar panels are gonna last for 25 years or more. I mean, they will degrade slightly, but even after 30 years, they should still be working 80% of what they were when they started. And as far as, they're built tough. They're Underwriter Laboratories test them. They can take, 1-inch hailstones at 80 miles an hour. In Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria, the entire grid got trashed, but the solar panels that were there stayed functioning. Same in North Carolina when they had their hurricane. The solar is very tough and resilient. So I'm not too worried that things are gonna break, and there's no moving parts either. So there's really no maintenance. I know people who have solar that have had squirrel issues. I've heard of bird issues, birds nesting underneath, but you don't have to really do anything. It just kind of does its thing. It's sun shines on a shiny surface, and somehow it powers my house. It's kind of amazing to me.
How about snow?
Snow's a problem. Yeah, my roof doesn't shed the snow very well. So when it's, the last week or so, haven't been making much energy. But when the solar contractors come and sort of give you an idea of what size system you would need, that's all factored in. They know, during a few weeks out of the winter, you're not going to make any energy. During the summer, it's going to be great. So they can figure that in. But the thing is, I'm still tied to the grid. So even if my panels aren't making any energy, it doesn't make any difference to me. My bill may be a little bit higher that month, but it doesn't change the way that I use electricity at home.
And that's when you get to use your net metering credits.
Exactly.
How much weight did they add to your
Let me just pass the mic around. So we're gonna tape this and so everybody else can hear the questions, because that's gonna be informative.
How much weight did the panels add to your roof?
Yeah, good question. In order to get a permit from the city, they had to have an engineer look at it, structural engineer, just to make sure. The panels themselves are really not heavy. They have an aluminum frame around them, but the panel itself is what, like a ½ an inch thick or something like that? Yeah, so they don't weigh very much at all. But that's one of the things you have to assess, make sure structurally the roof can handle it.
Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. Start out with the simple one with the tax credit. That's only for installation costs, not for materials or anything of that nature.
It's 30% of the total system cost.
So
Everything.
the panels, installation, tax,
Everything.
you get the 30%.
And I looked it up after I sat down, and it is the end of 2021 is when that is set to expire.
It tapers down actually after 2019. It's at 30% now, and then it tapers down.
Last question, I'm still confused with the RECs. Is that based upon the number of panels or the size of your system? Will that make the determination how many RECs that you will receive?
It's based on the size of the system, basically. They do an estimate of how many kilowatt hours your system is going to produce over 15 years, I think, and then they front you that number of RECs for all 15 years at the beginning of the project before it's energized. So you get that up front.
Okay. Get the mic. These are all great questions. I want to make sure.
Yeah, and please speak in the microphone. I know it's
hard to do.
Thanks, Alderman. And thank you to all the panelists. This has been great. So I'm a renter. I'm probably not going to install my roof, so my question is for Tomas. I'm just wondering, I had trouble understanding kind of, if I invested like $10,000 in community solar, let's say, what does that look like in terms of, like my net present value, or what that investment looks like, how it comes back to me?
Who wants to take that one? Tomas?
So I can
Okay.
provide a fair amount.
Speak in the mic, please.
All right. So I'll give you the slightly disappointing answer first. We are still finalizing what our subscription offering is going to look like. Developers like ourselves are going to be offering savings on the energy portion of your power bill. So for that, you will see a 5 or 10% savings month in, month out on that. So it may shift as to what the the amount of the system you are subscribed to, and whether it's a June or a February. But you will see your savings based on the amount of the system that you were subscribed to. And developers work with subscribers to identify, all right, what has your power bill been for the last couple of years? What are your historical? Because it doesn't make sense to under or over subscribe. But very soon you're going to be able to get a lot more detail from developers on that.
So just to follow up on that, are you targeting a break even, kind of similar to the rooftop construction for the subscriber? Because that's kind of, I think, the bottom line, right? I mean, yeah.
So it'll be month to month. Yeah.
Sir, you had a question in the back?
You wouldn't want to install one of these on a roof that's only got 10 years of life left, would you? If you got a 25-year life on the panels?
I'm going to give that one to Jay.
What do you have to do to put a new roof on your house? Take
Yeah,
all that off?
it's a great question, because these are going to last for longer than the roof unless you just put a new roof on. So yeah, if you have less than 10 years left on your roof, you want to seriously consider, well, maybe do the roof and then do the panels. The thing that weathers a roof more than anything else is probably the sun beating down on it. So the area of the roof under the panels isn't going to age quite as much. But you still, when the contractor comes out to assess your home, you got to really get them to be honest with you, and that's why I'd recommend not just having one guy out, but maybe 2 or 3 different companies, or even a roofing company that you may trust to give you a fair estimate of how much life is left in the roof.
Thank you. Does this system produce high voltage, or there's nothing with batteries, right?
Yeah, I have no batteries. It produces DC, and then it goes to an inverter, which is on the side of my house. Some of the panels have an inverter on the back of each one, but it basically goes to AC, and then it goes into my circuit breaker in the basement and into my house, and the excess goes to the grid.
Thank you.
One follow-up on that. So one of the things that I mentioned before is that there's an approved vendor list now for the state of Illinois. To get on the vendor list, you have to be a credible contractor. And they will tell you if there's something wrong with your roof. They will also do the permitting for you, and they will do all the paperwork for you to sign up for net metering with ComEd. So from the customer's perspective, it's pretty easy. I want to commend all of you for being part of the SoulSmart program, because my last job was working for one of the biggest rooftop installers in the country, and a lot of customer frustration comes from delay in permitting. No matter how well-intentioned the cities are, if they don't know how to deal with a solar permit, it causes delay, and then you get customers who are frustrated, and you get salespeople who are frustrated, and everyone hates everyone, and it's a mess.
Not in this town, never.
Right?
But SoulSmart has really done a great job working with local permitting authorities to make that happen smoothly, and installers really do all of that work for you. So it's not a nightmare of paperwork either with the utility company or with the permitting authority anymore.
Thanks, Becky. That's a great comment.
So I have a question for those at the city. Are there any kind of like Brightline restrictions in terms of where these panels can be placed? So, for example, like not on the front of the home, or like not in like facing a street or something?
Great question. You want Kathy, or
Yeah,
do you want,
I think she's ready for
Kathy
that one.
on the spot. Yeah. And I think it's a really good question. How many are in the city, right? And how many people have? How far are we along? I think we're close to. Our goal is to get to bronze. Is that
Yep.
is that a
correct.
city goal? I'm
Yeah.
not speaking out of turn. And I'll pass it over to Kathy.
With respect to where they can be located, the historic districts are more sensitive. So in that area, likely they would need to be away from the street facing, but in the rest of the community, there is no restriction. We would, ideally they'd be on south facing, but they don't have to be on south
Can
facing.
you remind everybody what historic is?
The historic district primarily covers much of the east side, obviously, historic, the older homes. There's also a historic district along Green Bay Road. It doesn't mean you can't have solar, it just means we'd look at that a little bit more closely. Often, many of the homes in the historic district are on large lots, so you don't have that view. Some historic homes have slate roofs, which could present a little bit different problem. But there's no blanket limitation on solar. As far as how many we have a fair number of contacts, property owners who look at doing solar, and at least to date, I think their economic analysis has not led them to actually implement them. We actually do permitting, plan review, permitting, and inspection for Bannockburn, so we've had more experience in Bannockburn on some very large homes that have done some very extensive installations. But our process is quick. Certainly being part of SoulSmart, we've been inundated with the vendors already contacting us, wanting us to promote them. We don't promote specific vendors, but certainly going with a certified vendor makes sense, and they certainly have our number. We probably get 6 calls a week from them. So they're there, and the process is pretty quick.
Any other questions on the city process, or? Okay, you had your hand up first. Sorry, I've been trying to be fair.
So if you don't want to sell the energy back to ComEd and you want to store it, what examples do you have of storage systems for residential homeowners?
Okay, good work out here. Who wants to take that? Okay.
Yeah. So I kind of looked at that a little bit with my most recent install. So I had the one that you see up there, and then I bought an electric car and started buying electricity again. So I got some on the west side of my house, and I thought, what if the power goes out? What if there's a big disruption in the grid? It'd be nice if I had a battery. Batteries are still kind of expensive. If you look at it like as an alternative to a generator, it may make sense. But you're not going to really store a ton of energy that's going to keep a lot going for a long time. I'd say maybe look at Tesla's Powerwall. That's probably one of the most well-known kind of systems. But there's other battery backups that are there. And, they're going to likely get cheaper over time. My installation is such that if I wanted to add a battery to it in the future, that would be an option. But I'd say it's there, but it's expensive right now.
I concur with most of that. I used to work at Tesla, so I love the Powerwall. I don't have one yet because net metering is actually using the grid as a battery, basically. And net metering is another thing that is scheduled to expire in Illinois. So if you get your system now, you'll have net metering for the whole life of the system. But after we reach 5% of penetration, so 5% of demand in Illinois is coming from either community or rooftop solar, then they're going to replace net metering with a different kind of incentives that pays you for the use of the inverter on the grid, but doesn't pay you the full retail credit for exporting electricity. So at that point, batteries will be cheaper and more useful to you, and you won't want to use the grid as storage anymore. You'll want to use the battery. So I think for me, I'm aiming right in that sweet spot.
Thank you. Why the rooftop? Could you do it in your yard? Is the cost differential too big? First question. Second question for the city is, what's the benefit to the city between the bronze, silver, and gold? I understand how the community is better served by it, but is there a benefit to the city from that?
Okay, good questions.
Yeah, I can use this one. There is no actual benefit. It is the whole thing is somewhat based on recognition of what the city is doing. So it just means that we're stating higher goals. So they have this long checklist. And there are certain things that we know that we can get for the bronze level. We can do some extra things to make it, I don't want to say make it easier, but it's things that will promote more, whatever. So there's no actual benefit to the city itself at all. The gold level is much higher. The requirements, and some of this has to do with like the amount of training and things like that. So we're starting at the bronze. We would love to get to silver, and we're not that far from that. It's just a matter of we think it's a nice recognition that people will look at it and say the city is interested in promoting solar.
You want to touch on the installation costs on ground or off roof?
Sure. I mean, if you have, most people do rooftop because that's the space they have, right? A lot of people don't have big backyards or fields where they can put a ground mount. Canopies exist, like carport canopies, but they're more expensive at this stage. Putting it on the roof is the least expensive of the distributed ways to go.
Jay, I have a question for you. How much penetration has happened in Highland Park, given your example, and has it really taken off, or just curious what's happened in your community?
Sure. It hasn't taken off, but it's building slowly. Highland Park, like Lake Forest, one of the great things is we've got a lot of mature trees. So a lot of houses, it's Lake Forest. So a lot of people who may really want solar, it's just not going to work on their roof, and fortunately, that's why there's community solar as an option.
One of the things to add to that too, I did reach out to an installer. I won't say who or anything, but I asked them a few questions about some of the challenges, and the first thing they brought up was trees. And they said that's one of the reasons why Lake Forest, we know that a lot of people, they're not going to. Obviously, we hope not. I didn't mention, but I'm superintendent of Parks and Forestry, so I don't want you cutting your trees down. so that we're not promoting that. But we do know that is one of the major restrictions. And then the second thing they mentioned was slate roofs. Not really they can't do it. They also said that cedar shakes can be very difficult. They actually didn't do it. They also mentioned that they wouldn't do any roof that was over 17 years old. Those were the kind of things they said right off the bat. That eliminates a fair amount of people right there. But as everyone has said, if you get started with this process, a big part of what they do for you is figure that out and make sure it's worthwhile.
So back to the city, for ground installation, is that allowed if it's not a roof installation?
Sure. It's definitely a Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. The question was, everyone heard it, was ground installation requirements in terms of space and permitting.
We would look at zoning setbacks. Each zoning district has setbacks. The larger lots, 1.5-acre lots, have 20-foot setbacks from the side yard. And we'd also look at trees. We'd want to think long and hard before you cut down a heritage tree. Certainly, we're not going to let you impact a neighbor's tree or cut significant branches. So I think those are the considerations that go into that.
I'll catch you up. Sorry, you're next.
I have a question for Tomas about trajectory. I know you're fairly far down the road with Wilmette in getting together a group of subscribers, and there is some financial advantage to being in a group, I understand. The City of Lake Forest, we're not even close to that yet. Could you go through that with the audience a little bit? What does it look like if you can find a group? How do we form a group? What's the real advantage to a group versus being an individual subscriber? And where are you with Wilmette? Thank you.
And please talk into the mic.
So I'll speak kind of about, I'll start with what's been happening across the state. Across the state, community organizations, churches, graduates of the Solar Pipeline Training Program, which Becky touched briefly upon, across the state there have actually been programs to get vulnerable populations into the solar industry. Folks across the state have been working over the last year and a half, 2 years, to try to form groups to say, okay, we have land, or we have a network of churches, or we have folks who are like a Wilmette or a Lake Forest or an Oak Park, and we believe in this and we enjoy saving money. And these efforts have happened across the state. Some have been more successful than others in terms of partnering with developers or bringing their own projects to bear. With Wilmette, we connected with folks there last year, and they already had interest and a pretty strong network of nonprofits and interested homeowners and folks who'd be interested in subscribing. So as we've worked on building our portfolio of projects across the state, we've tried to work with them to identify if there were any sites immediately in the Wilmette area or potential community solar projects that they could subscribe to. And so one of the things that's really helpful, well, one, we are now in the process of starting to submit our projects to the state framework to see which of our projects will get approved. So that's definitely going to be an indicator of how we end up working with them, and how any developer works with a community group is which projects they have and which ones are closest to the community group that is interested in doing a larger subscription together, or saying we have a group of X amount of people or organizations. But it really, I want to commend what everyone is doing in Lake Forest, because it's efforts like this and leadership and structure like this that really makes it feasible for a developer or for a group of citizens or nonprofits to be ready and to have the framework to connect with the developer. The other thing I'll say is this is just the beginning of solar across Illinois. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities to connect with developers across the state for those kind of efforts.
Is there any progress with shingles being used for solar? No. And the other question I had is, what is the city doing with all their buildings? Are they going to do any solar panels on the city buildings? And have you spoken to Lake Forest Hospital about it, their rooftops?
I had the same question.
Yeah, okay. I can answer that in part. Hospital, I don't know. Maybe Kathy has some insight on that. But I can tell you that we did look at the community solar. We talked to a person months ago about that possibility. One of the thoughts was our municipal services facility. It's fairly new. I think it's 9 years old, 10 years old. And it's a big flat roof, so it did occur to us that maybe that would work. The people that we talked to said that it really didn't make sense. They said it's much more feasible if you're building and you do something like that rather than retrofitting. So we were interested in, in the beginning we thought it's worth looking at. At the moment, we're not considering it on any current projects. I will say, though, that we are looking at it in some of the parks, and I just mentioned I'm the superintendent of parks. So I'd like to do a possible demonstration kind of a project, it maybe at Town Line for one of our pavilions. I'd love to do something like that. We're looking into it. We're thinking if we can find a grant or something like that, it would be a great piece. But so we're wanting to go through that process. So I don't know if there's any insight on hospital.
I'll say I have not given up on the municipal services building.
Good.
It's a great opportunity, so I keep pushing.
Yeah.
The hospital, we've had some discussions. We'll see more build out on the hospital site, particularly on the south campus. So I think there is opportunity for discussions, not only with the hospital, but other institutions, Lake Forest College, our school districts, our private schools. So we're trying to promote it, we're trying to have those discussions, and we'll continue to do so. And I'm from Oregon, too.
I went to law school in Oregon.
So this question is for Tomas. So we buy through Arcadia Energy offsets rather than, which runs through ComEd. So there's effectively we pay a premium for that. You're saying that the community solar is Illinois based and there's a cost savings off of the normal rate. Is that sort of the big selling point, is that instead of being 5 or 10% higher, it's 5 or 10% lower and based in Illinois?
So yeah, there's a couple things I can One, fantastic that you're working with Arcadia. For those who don't know, they provide access to renewable energy projects and folks being able to subscribe. But also, and I'm sure you can speak more to this, they, along with some other companies, have online platforms. One of the trickiest things about community solar, and that we have been racking our brains over, I now have 3 gray hairs, is that how do you make these savings accessible while also having to explain to people, okay, you're going to have your normal power bill, but then you're going to have a bill credit, and you'll see these savings, but then, yeah, I've lost all of you. Companies like Arcadia and some other folks have online platforms where folks will be able to keep one bill. So I know there's some folks in this space, they're coming into Illinois, so there's a lot of benefit from that, one in terms of actually getting folks to adopt, but also the fact that it is in Illinois means Illinois jobs, means happy farmers, means happy folks who subscribe because we're going to see savings on our energy bills, and then increased tax revenue where we actually have these projects. Those are just a few of the examples, but that's, thank you for bringing up Arcadia, and that's really fantastic.
Sorry, Kathy, you're next. You still have questions?
What is the problem the vendors have with cedar roofs? Are they safe? Is there other problems?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, but the one I talked to just said that they couldn't do it. They didn't do them. Do you have any insight on that? Yeah.
It could be splitting the wood, or there's cracks.
Right.
There's maybe some other issues. Jay, do you have any?
Yeah, I don't really know. You know, the way that the panels are attached to the actual roof is through what's called a racking system, and those racking systems are then connected directly to the roof joists, and there's flashing that goes around it. So it may just be that there's not really a good racking system that's out there commercially or affordably for cedar roofs. That would be maybe my guess.
I did see an installation where it was a newer installation where they were shingling anyway, that they put the typical asphalt shingle under where the solar panels were, and then on the edges off to the side, it was all cedar shakes. So some people do that.
So I have a two-part question. Let's say you have a 2,000 square foot house. How many panels would you have to do? And here's my second question, which it feels stupid to ask, because it looks like the panel needs exposure, right? But could we have smaller ones? Could they get small and still work? That's my kind of counterintuitive question.
So it's like a Moore's Law kind of question around efficiency.
Well, it all depends on how much energy you use, right? So, you know, I think before I got my panels, I was using a lot less energy than the typical house in my neighborhood was. So you got to kind of look at your average monthly bill, and when you talk to an installer, they'll want that information as well. So, I mean, you can count the panels there. My average monthly bill, I think I had like 400 kilowatt hours on average in a month, averaged out throughout the whole year, and that was going to basically take care of it. And then with regard to like the sizing and everything, there's fire codes that say it has to be, you know, in a certain distance from the edge or from the ridge of the roof. But solar panels are generally about the same size. They're like 3 feet or 2.5 feet by 5 feet or something like that, right?
They're all designed to be the most cost-effective they can possibly be. So they're a certain size because they've perfected, you know, how much a single installer can carry and how quickly it goes into the racking system, and the racking systems are all standardized to that size panel. So it's not like you can order different sized ones. It's all pretty standard, and it's all designed to make it as cost effective as possible.
Thanks again. I realize I sit on the sustainability committee for my church, and I'm wondering if any of these incentives, I'm sure we'd be interested in rooftop solar and things like that. I'm wondering if any of these incentives are available for places like churches or small businesses and things like that.
Have you experienced anything in Highland Park with churches or temples or any houses of worship or public buildings or nonprofits?
The one issue that you are going to run into with nonprofits is you're not going to get that income tax credit, right? So that's a problem. But there's something called a power purchase agreement, which is, it's kind of like there's a third party that will basically pay to put the panels and own the panels that are up on the church's roof. The church will continue to pay their electric bill, maybe less than what it was initially, but instead of paying to ComEd, they would pay to this company with the power purchase agreement. Then after a certain number of years, the church could then buy the panels from them. And since it's initially owned by a for-profit company with tax liabilities, they're able to take advantage of that federal tax credit, and then they can factor that in when they're deciding on, you know, the payments that the church would make for the electricity. You want to add anything?
There's a fantastic nonprofit, Faith in Place, that works on the intersection of sustainability and with houses of worship. So they'd be a great group of folks to connect with to learn more about your options. Faith in Place.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if we're encouraging all these homeowners and businesses and churches and other buildings in town or other towns to install solar panels, why is the city building, which is not that old, so hard to retrofit and set an example?
Well, we haven't given up on it either. Like Kathy said,
Okay. I'm just curious.
we've only talked to one company,
Okay.
and it was their opinion that it wouldn't be very practical. This is pretty new to us too. We haven't given up on the idea, but I don't know that.
I've been to the building, maybe.
Yeah, it's.
And it's not overhung by
Right.
trees. It's not, I mean, it would seem to be a pretty ideal
It does.
situation
That was our
for a
initial
solar
thought as
garden.
well. We think the same thing. It's just a huge open space. It looks like it's prime. That was just one opinion though.
I think I'm going to speak on behalf of myself only. I think duly noted, right? So I think a lot of it gets down to economics, and
Right.
all of it gets down to economics and capital scarcity. And so if you think of our city as a business, last 10 years or so, we're around 85 to 90 million top line. We have around $50 million in debt. We have 8 to 9 million in capital projects across all the funds. We have around $10 million of unfunded priority one infrastructure projects across the city. That's equipment, it's storm sewers, it's everything. Well, actually, the storm sewers goes to 2064, and every 3 years, as we do the roads, we're trying to fix the storm sewers. So it becomes a relative priority, but point, hugely well taken. And I'm very much let's do exploration to figure it out. Like, what's the what if analysis, and let's have the debate and the conversation about the best use of capital, right? So I think that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, in terms of feasibility study, you just need to make sure that your estimates are accurate and you're configuring it properly and you're consulting with experts, and you don't need to spend a lot of effort to do that. And we haven't talked about this at all, but I'm sure Kathy and, so thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, and also the hospital,
Yeah.
we really didn't finish that answer.
Yeah.
The hospital's a flat roof, no trees,
Yeah,
no
sure.
obstructions.
Yeah.
Recently built,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
would
yeah.
think that would be
Well, of course. I mean, we could certainly provide leadership in how we formed and framed the economics of the decision, and then share with community partners. I mean, that's certainly doable. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but
Nothing happens
I'm on camera. Oh.
So, and I think kind of on that same vein, Jim, not to put you on the spot, so there was a City of Lake Forest put out an RFP last month along with the City of Highland Park for a sustainability consultant. And I think one of the things that was in that RFP that was mentioned is that City of Lake Forest doesn't have any funds allocated for that type of person in the budget. So I think one of the questions that I think people in this room would say is, can that be something that the city council kind of takes up as something that the people in this room presumably want us to be spending some money on, whether that's, not necessarily a full-time person, but a starting point.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of different ways. The most important thing is to advance the issue, right? And you could have a full-time person, or you could have existing staff that's dedicated to it. I just took over the collaborative. That's why I joked about not knowing the Jobs Act, right? Because I just said, here, you're in charge now to oversee it. So I'm getting up to speed on that mission and its purpose. And, to me, the staff is amazing at the city level. I've been involved in the city for quite a while. And, let's just make sure that there's dedicated effort, an FTE, to think through the issues. And that's what part of the, the mission of the collaborative is. Sometimes you could hire someone and not really advance the agenda at all, right? So I want to be really clear on, well, if we don't have an FTE, that doesn't mean we're not advancing the issues, right? It could be quite the opposite. Sometimes people just say, look, I have a person and everything's taken care of, but the issues aren't being advanced. So I've been impressed with the engagement of that collaborative. And, the city does have financial pressures and does have competing needs. And, that's part of it. It's, we're trying to figure out, with all the infrastructure that we need, what's the highest order use of capital. And certainly the community has a huge input into that. But there's 6,000 households and 20,000 people, and we have beaches that are having problems. Have you been to our library? Yeah, we all love the library, right? Well, there's dome issues with that, and there's structural issues with the library. There's ravines. There's all kinds of different things. So I as an alderman, I want to make sure we have the proper debate, and we go through capital budgeting process all the time. And I think the first step is just to let's figure out what the feasibility work has been and just see where we're at. But
What about corporate sponsorship or partnership with some of the corporations that are actually out near where the building is?
Conway?
I mean,
I think that's something to explore. So I think that's great feedback. Thank you.
On the rural solar development.
So you don't need the microphone.
No.
You talk so loud. I bring it over. I brought it over twice now, and you got the
I
booming
think you said
voice.
there were 7,000 panels on a rural development?
So for
15 to 20 acres in size?
Yeah, for
How much generation of electricity comes from that? How many homes would it serve approximately?
So for a 2 megawatt project, which is approximately 7,000 solar panels, that can be anywhere depending on the size of the home, 300 to 500 homes, or potentially more if they're, for example.
This county has over 30,000 acres of forest preserve land. I can't see how all the houses in Lake Forest are suitable for individual panels. But if you get to the forest preserve sites, that might benefit the community.
Those are trees. Yeah, trees and Lake.
Oh, no, go to Middle Forks Farm. Look at the beautiful views.
Yeah, so I
You've
think
got the sites there, right?
I was going to ask Tomas, site selection, because Wilmette came up, right? So how do you think strategically as developer about site selection? What criteria do you use? Because there's, it's I think for the experts, it's probably a little more complicated.
Thank you. So there's a couple dynamics that go into site selection, and I'll start with one aspect, and that's the narrative. So we have a proposed project in Rockford that is in a covered quarry that they can't do any development in. It's in a low-income neighborhood, and that has just been fenced off and just kind of in a state of disrepair. And the city of Rockford has had it for a while, and we're hoping to put solar panels on there and provide local benefits. Additionally, in Tazewell County, we have a project with Fond du Lac Township, and they had land that was set aside for a cemetery, and they were only going to be using over the next 35 years a certain portion of it. And by putting it as a potential community solar project, that was local savings and local tax revenue that they otherwise would not be able to have. And it was land that had no better use. So there is kind of a narrative aspect to it in terms of how we usually connect with entities or farmers. But then there's also looking at how close is it to a substation? Does it have three-phase lines going along? Is there historical appreciation, in terms of like acres of trees, or is there important land? And is there a better use for the land? If that means that maybe there's a Walmart, coming in 5 years and no developer is going to be able to beat the local benefits of that, But if it's a piece of land which isn't going to be used for development, or it's not your most profitable land if you're a farmer, then that's also what makes it a good consideration. And then we have to connect with ComEd and Ameren to make sure that it actually, the lines and everything there can support the energy as well.
One other.
To that, the reason to think about rooftop distributed solar, in addition to the projects that Tomas is talking about, is because it's sited where the demand is. So you don't have to spend as much transporting, distributing, transmitting the electricity. And you can actually lower the cost of the whole electricity system by taking that demand off the system. And even if you're exporting some of that electricity, you're exporting it within your feeder on the distribution system, so it goes to your neighbors on that feeder. So again, you're not contributing to congestion in the distribution system. So those are some of the benefits of rooftop distributed power, and I think that they're a good complement.
Yeah, but this county has a Zion plant that's not producing any nuclear power, and you got a whole grid system going through this county. And all that land underneath it can be utilized. And you got the power lines there.
Well, that's a good reason to,
Yeah, and I think, early stage in the market, right, I think is a key word here. I'm not on the development side, but I imagine that they're going to start getting smarter about where to put it and how to do it and how to develop the land and to work with the municipalities and the community partners, right? And this is just starting, right? It's just really burgeoning. So I also want to check, everybody good on time? I think I'm officially an hour late, or is that right? Or are we on time? Oh, 8:30, okay, sorry. We got a little time. We got 4 minutes, sorry. Kathy, sorry.
So I was sitting and thinking, because I have cedar shakes and I wouldn't have a 20-foot setback, maybe I should put a wind turbine on my house. And then, wind turbines here's to my question. They have some drawbacks, right? They make noise, maybe they get birds. What are the environmental drawbacks of panels? Like, do they glare in my neighbor's windows? Do they create heat around the house?
Who wants to take that one?
I can start with, there's a way to do community solar where it's actually really great for birds and local pollinators as well. So I don't have it in this slide, but the Audubon Society actually has signed off on community solar because you now have a fenced off area which already has has the potential to have local pollinators. It's a safe area, but it's all in how it's done. But in terms of like heating up or creating an excessive glare, the panels, they don't do that. So birds are actually able to land on them even. But more detail.
No, I think that's right. There aren't big wildlife drawbacks. In fact, we think that there are a lot of wildlife benefits to setting aside some land in solar use. I think one thing that people are working on and getting up and running is making sure that there's a really great end-of-life recycling system for the panels once they've gone through their useful life, and that the silicon and everything gets reused and managed. But that's the only challenge that I can see. If we're not on top of that, could get sticky in the future.
I just want to make one point, is that although we don't have a solar installation on any city buildings, a number of years ago we did work with the Ragdale Foundation on city-owned property when they were doing significant restoration, and we were able to do a geothermal installation. So certainly we had land there available. So again, I think to Alderman Preschlack's point, we are trying to really be creative and be forward-thinking where we can be.
One other thing to add to one of the comments before about forest preserve, I would also add Lake Forest open lands. One of the things to keep in mind, I think they've may very well have land that's suitable for community solar, but keep in mind, many of the properties like that have, rare endangered species, or they're native prairies and things like that. They're not going to be interested in putting solar panels on there. And I agree with you that they can work together. However, I don't think, we've talked to Open Lands, and they're part of the collaborative. They certainly wouldn't want a huge solar panel array on one of their native properties. But having said that, I know the Forest Preserve, they have property, they have 30,000 acres. They have properties that have farm leases on them. So there are areas that may work. We have nothing to say about that, but just don't jump to the conclusion that these great open spaces, they have value in their own right as well.
Okay, we'll have one question, and then I'm going to ask you all to put the slide up for your contact info. Would you mind if people reached out with the emails? And Jay, maybe you could communicate yours, because you guys have been really fantastic. So hold on.
I just wanted to go back to the non-roof options, because we have cedar shakes and trees, but open space, sunny open space. So, and it seems as if that would be an easier installation, really, than a roof, although maybe harder to make it rotate. But then how far away can it be from how far can because it has to be, won't be as close to where you're using the electricity, right? So is there like a distance that it can't be where it doesn't make sense?
I've seen them out on the back 40, so I think it's just a matter of running a wire to your house. I don't think that, I've seen them 10 feet away from your house. I've seen them 100 feet away. I've seen them 500 feet away. So I don't know that there might be a zoning rule here, but there's not a technical restriction.
Okay. Last question.
No, it's not a question, actually. If you want to see something, if you drive along Sheridan Road toward Great Lakes, there's a small, and I don't know who owns it or who did it, but there is a small windmill, and there's solar panels on a building. And I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's part of the base or whatever, but if you want to see the glare or lack thereof, and the actual solar panels up on a building, it's a great place to look. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I think that concludes our program, and I just wanted to first, obviously, thank everybody for coming, and for all the people in the collaborative that put all the energy into making this forum happen. For the leadership of the city, and then most importantly for you guys coming and caring so much about what you're doing. And you're so mission driven and purposeful about this, and so I really appreciate it, both at the community level and at the personal level. And so it really is a gift for us to have you here. So thank you. A round of applause for Jay and Tomas and Becky. And you have Becky's email. Jay didn't volunteer his email. He's probably smart about that. And Tomas put in a Twitter and an info, but happy
personal email with anyone who wants to.
Yeah, so come on up.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the great questions.